Hey, what is up guys, and welcome back to a brand new video. I haven't done one of these in a while. I've been doing a lot of streams lately. If you want to check those out, then make sure to follow my Twitch, twitch.tv/JustAchillea. We're doing a lot of Football Manager, we're doing a lot of FIFA right now, and a lot of Warzone, and plenty of other things to come as well. So make sure to check out the streams there. But I think it's time for another normal YouTube video, right? So today what I'm gonna be doing is discussing the most underrated players at each Premier League club. Now, obviously I tried to keep up with every club that I can. Unfortunately, the extent of my knowledge for every club isn't the same as what it is for Spurs. It's hard to keep up with that many teams in one go to know the exact details. But for a lot of these are gonna be players, in my opinion, aren't being talked about enough, and who I think have had a very good season and are very underrated in the Premier League right now. So it's gonna be my opinion, and I think it's time to get on with it. Let's go. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in alphabetical order through the teams, because that's just the easiest, which means we're starting off with Arsenal. Now, obviously as a Spurs fan, I can't imagine there even being any underrated players in the first place, but I've got to try and stay as impartial as possible. For me, there is one player that comes to mind where I think that he's had a very good season since he's come into their team. Amongst Arsenal fans, he's obviously rated, but in terms of the fans in general of the Premier League and football worldwide, I don't think people are talking about him enough, and that is Saka. Saka is obviously a very young player that's come into Arsenal's team, and ever since he's come in, he's basically having to play wing back. I believe he's originally a winger, and he's assisted Lacazette about 3-4 times already, as far as I can remember, and I feel like he's just not being talked about enough by other fans. Swiftly moving on to Aston Villa. When you think of the Aston Villa team, there's obviously the names that stand out in terms of quality players are Grealish and Mings. They're probably the top two, you would say, that are by far the standouts in the team, so they're already quite highly rated. One player that I think doesn't get talked about enough, and I think is underrated in the team, is El Ghazi. A lot of football fans are going on about McGinn, saying how good he is, and of course he's had a great season. Well, great for Aston Villa considering they're in a relegation battle, but he's been a very good player that a lot of people have talked about. But in fact, looking at the statistics, El Ghazi's actually got more goals and more assists. I think it's a very underrated player that no one really seems to be talking about. Now we're talking about Bournemouth. I think one player that's been quite underrated in their side is Philip Billing. Looking at all of his stats through the Premier League this season, he comes into the top 3 of a lot of stats for Bournemouth this season so far. He's third on the list for passes. He's had the third amount of shots in the team. He's got the most tackles and aerial battles won, third highest clearances, and second highest interceptions in the team. This guy has been pretty good for Bournemouth all season. Again, it's another team that's in this relegation battle, but still, when we're talking about underrated players inside, he is definitely one of them, since a lot of people this year have been going on about Callum Wilson, Harry Wilson, and Ake. Brighton is a tough one for underrated player, because I feel like everyone already rates their good players. Obviously, Dunk, everyone knows, is a very good defender for Brighton. I think there are 2 names I'd probably like to throw out there for Brighton. I think one has to go to the goalkeeper, Matt Ryan, because he seems to be in almost everyone's fantasy Premier League, so clearly he's doing something right. And this other one's tough because, like, the other one is Morpay? I'm butchering his name totally, but he's got the most goals and the most assists for Brighton this year, I believe. And he's been probably their best player. And I remember when we went to play them, Sam Chipek actually told me to watch out for this guy, because he saw him play last year when he was at his previous club. And yeah, he just devoured teams and he destroyed us as well. So he seems like another class player at Brighton that no other fans seem to be talking about and don't really know too much about him. So I'd say he's quite underrated, one of the most underrated players in the Premier League. God, we're really going through all the stinkers already. Next up, Burnley. For me, I think it's McNeil. McNeil, I think, has been a very good player for Burnley. Another one that not really many other fans are talking about. Obviously, if you are a Burnley fan, you're going to know who your best players are, but I feel like fans from other clubs, they don't really notice these players, and I think McNeil has kind of gone under the radar at Burnley a bit this year and has been a very good player for them. Now we move on to Chelsea. Now Chelsea is a tough one. Where do you find the balance between underrated and up-and-coming youth prospects? Because obviously Chelsea have a fair few of those. Gilmour, Reece James, Tomori, they've got a good few youngsters that are coming up, but I feel like they've done well enough this year that people know their quality. One player that for me is actually probably their most underrated player this season is Giroud. They wanted rid of him. The only reason they didn't get rid of him in the end is because they didn't want him to sell him to a rival, which is Spurs. Any time that he's come on for Chelsea, he's always got a goal. For some reason, Lampard doesn't start him. So I think he's definitely been a massively underrated player at Chelsea this season. I mean, I wish we got him in January, to be honest, to fill our striker issue. Crystal Palace. Now, from an outsider's perspective, I think one of the most underrated players at Crystal Palace is Ayew. Obviously, the first thing when you think of Crystal Palace is Zaha. He's the main one. Actually, looking at who has been getting their goals this season, it's actually Ayew. Ayew's pretty much been the star man, I would say, for Crystal Palace. He's played 28 times this year for Crystal Palace and managed to get 8 goals and an assist. And again, I don't hear anyone talking about him at all. It's always about Zaha when it comes to Crystal Palace. And I feel like that Jordan Ayew just deserves some of the limelight. He's been one of their key players this season. Moving on, and we're talking about Everton now. Now, I'm saying this one because Edward James, an Everton vlogger, I tweeted this out yesterday, who's the most underrated player at your club, and he came back with me saying Theo Walcott. Now, when I first looked at this, I laughed because obviously, you know, ex-goon, I'm gonna laugh at him. So what would be very interesting to know, if there's any Everton fans out there watching this, do you agree with him? Now, for me, when I'm thinking about an underrated player at Everton who looked like a baller, but again, is someone that's not really talked about as a key player in the squad, and that for me is Andre Gomez. Andre Gomez is a player that I actually wanted Spurs to sign last season. Was it last season or the season before? Either way, I wanted Spurs to sign him because he looked like a very good midfielder. Leicester City. Now, there's a couple names that I think were on the list here. Harvey Barnes being one of them because he's had a spectacular season and someone that's actually had to fill in for the goals while Vardy wasn't around. And amongst the Leicester team that's doing very well this season, another player I'd like to throw out there as another rated is Sionku. Is that how you pronounce it? Sionku? Before the season started, you would have thought them selling Harry Maguire would be a massive issue for Leicester, especially with the price tag as well. You'd think he'd be one of their most important players. In truth, Leicester's defense has been so much better without him this year, and with Sionku there instead. And I feel like he just doesn't really get the praise that he deserves for actually being a very, very, very solid defender for Leicester this year, potentially helping them get a Champions League spot if the season carries on. So I'd say Sionku is probably Leicester's most underrated player. Now, the next one's particularly tricky because they are the best team in the league right now. It's Liverpool. When your whole 11 are absolutely banging it this season, how do you choose an underrated player? There is only one player that really comes to mind as someone that is underrated, and for me that's Matip. A lot of people are going on about Van Dijk being like the centre back, the one that's sorted their defence out, keeping the clean sheets every week, when Robertson and Arnold basically become wingers because of how well they're doing. A lot of the praise goes to Van Dijk, when in actuality, at the start of the season, I actually think Matip was the better defender out of the two. And especially when Gomez was injured at one point, he had to step in for him, and then vice versa, Gomez steps in for Matip when he was out injured. But I think when Matip was fit and at the start of the season, I thought he was a very, very, very good defender and very underrated in that Liverpool side, to helping them go unbeaten for so long. Man City. For me, the most underrated player at Man City is probably Zinchenko. Again, when you've got a team or a squad full of world-class players, how could they possibly have an underrated player? And for me, I'm going to give it to Zinchenko because originally, what is he, like a midfielder? I'm pretty sure he was supposed to be a centre mid, but he's had to fill in the left-back role a lot because of Mendy's injuries. And to be honest with you, has done a very good job there. No complaints, can play left-back, left wing, defensive mid, like he can fill any position and is quite a versatile player for Man City. So another one that seems to always go under the radar in the side, and yeah, I'll give it to Zinchenko for City. Man United. Now I think Rance is going to agree with me on this one. I think the most underrated player at United is Fred. When he first came to United, everyone thought he was a flop, the amount that they spent on him. However, I have to give credit to him. In Man United's resurgence towards the end of this season, they've ended up 5th right now. I think Fred has been a very key part of that in that midfield. So I'm going to give credit where credit's due. I think he's a very underrated player right now in that Man United side. Newcastle. I'm just going to say it. St. Maximum. St. Maximum is a baller, bro. I don't care what anyone says. I like the guy. I love him. I think he's hilarious, especially on Twitter as well. I know that's got nothing to do with the football, but I just love the guy. So I'm just going to say he's the most underrated player at Newcastle. I got you, bro. Don't worry. Norwich. Norwich have a couple of good players, but a lot of people that know are good players, like Todd Cantwell. Buendia's a good player. Obviously, Pukki, everyone knew he was a good player at the start of the season because he was in everyone's fantasy football team and was getting goals left, right, and centre, and then kind of took his foot off the foot off the gas a little bit. And then another player that I think has been outstanding for Norwich and someone I would love to get is Max Aarons. But I feel like everyone now knows that he's a very, very good young English player. Whereas I think someone that is underrated in that case is the left back Lewis. He's a great young player from Northern Ireland, so I think he's just a great shout, to be honest with you, especially when everyone's raving about Max Aarons so much. I think he doesn't get the praise that he deserves. Very good left back for, well, as good as he can be in a poor Norwich side that can't seem to get goals and win games. Sheffield, right, Sheffield United. Now, overall, Sheffield have clearly overachieved this season, way past anyone's expectations. I mean, they're potentially able to get a Champions League spot if that 5th place does go to Champions League. But I think one that kind of goes under the radar at Sheffield is Musa. Musa at the start of the season was getting goals left, right and centre and assists. I was getting really pissed off when, when I was doing my fantasy team and I would have like Lundstrom or Baldock or someone like that, and then all of a sudden Musa is the one that's getting the goals and assists every week. And I was like, bro, of all the players, why him? Southampton, player that I don't think many people will know about, obviously unless you watch Southampton, I think is Obafemi. A lot of the talk this year has obviously been around Ings. He's absolutely banging it this year. But I think Obafemi, he's only 19 years old and he got 2 goals for them this season. But I'm pretty sure they brought him through the youth because he played in the Premier League 2, which is like the youth Premier League. So he played and I think got an assist in the one game that he played there, got brought up to the first team and has got 2 goals in a very short amount of time. So I think he's definitely one to watch out Southampton. Seems to be a very quick and quite strong player. So yeah, I'd say he's probably the most underrated player in that Southampton side right now. And now we move on to Spurs. Now, obviously what's been a very, very lackluster season for Spurs, it's quite tough to think of an underrated player in our team right now. But one name I'm just going to throw out, and it seems to be a very 50-50 split amongst Spurs fans, but for me, it's Harry Winks. When I tweeted this out, almost everyone that was a Spurs fan replied with Harry Winks. I think the issue with Winks this year, because we don't have that solid defensive midfielder anymore, he can't really play to his best game. When you look back at Winks' best performances, you either had Eric Dyer next to him at Spurs or Eric Dyer or Jordan Henderson next to him in England, and I feel like he plays very, very well when he's with a defensive midfielder because he can just focus on getting the ball and carrying it forward. Unfortunately, in the Spurs team this year, Eric Dyer has been very poor, has been injured and has since moved to centre-back. And also with the sale of Wanyama and Moussa Dembele, we just do not have a defensive midfielder whatsoever. So unfortunately, he's had to play that role a lot, and given his size, it doesn't suit his style of play, which is why I think he's a very underrated player for me, because I know that he has bags of potential and I know he can play well. He just unfortunately doesn't quite work in the system that we have right now at Spurs. On to Watford. Now we know players that shine at Watford. Deulofeu springs to mind. Everyone knows about Troy Deeney, but a player that I think has been very good this season and is I'd say quite underrated at Watford is Sarr. Now I think obviously the Watford fans themselves would know he's a good player, but I feel like the fans in the rest of the country don't actually realise. But for me, you'd never really think too much about Sarr being a threat, but when he came up against Tanganga a lot in that away match 0-0, he was causing a lot of trouble. He's a quick player, probably one of the most influential players at Watford right now. So I'd definitely say in the grand scheme of things, he's quite underrated. Now, West Ham. Oh, I don't know, it's just funny thinking about West Ham. Oh, I'm so gutted this season is like probably not going to happen because they were going to get relegated. They always escape relegation, I swear to God. It's so annoying. I think one player at West Ham that I think is criminally underrated is Fornals. I don't know why, since David Moyes has come back, he doesn't seem to be in the starting 11 a lot for West Ham. But when he does come on, has provided a goal or an assist or just a very important part of the play to help them score the goals that they have. Definitely probably the most underrated player in that West Ham side right now. Now finally, we're on to Wolves. Wolves was actually, I found quite difficult because they actually have a lot of very good players that everyone knows about. Someone for me that doesn't get the praise that he deserves in that Wolves side for them doing so well this year is Bolly. Now, unfortunately, I think he's been injured a lot this season because he's only had 13 appearances, but in those 13 appearances, Wolves have kept 7 clean sheets and have only conceded 9 goals. In 13 of his games, they've only conceded 9 and caught 7 clean sheets. Now, if that doesn't show you how influential he is as a defender in that Wolves side, considering I think they have 9 clean clean sheets all season. So there's only 2 more without him playing. That is an incredible stat, and definitely a player for me that has slipped under the radar, especially when you've got the likes of Jota, Jimenez, Traore, a lot of the forwards stealing the limelight this season. I think a lot of credit does have to go to their defence, and Bolly and Cody have done a fantastic job. And yeah, I would say he's probably the most underrated player at Wolves right now. Now, if you disagree with me, don't slay me. Just leave a comment down below whether you agree or disagree with who I think is underrated in each team in the Premier League. And obviously a lot of them I'm not going to know too much about the whole squad. There could be players that I've missed that might have gone under the radar, and if you watch them week in, week out, you will know better than I do. I'm just giving my opinion from an outsider's point of view and from a football fan in the general sense, who is underrated in the Premier League right now and are players that are ones to watch and who we should look out for if the season is to resume. So yeah, like I said, if you enjoyed this kind of video and you want to see more, make sure to smash that like button down below, subscribe, we've got plenty more content, and also subscribe to Offsiders YouTube. That's right, me and a group of other football YouTubers have set up a channel together, and we're going to be doing a lot of very, very entertaining videos. All the links will be in the description, so go check that out right now. We've already hit over 200 subscribers, nearly 300 subscribers without even uploading a video yet. So make sure to go follow that, and I shall see you guys for the next one. Peace.
No, there ain't no stopping us. Fly without boarding pass. Couldn't catch me, I be moving fast. Call me a shooting star. Let 'em know